And I would like to kick off the conversation regarding architectural innovation, and then we move on to a subject that you find more interesting and ask your questions, please, freely to the speakers directly at any point of the discussion. I would like to start with Simos. You again, a true expert in BIM and deals on a daily basis with innovative and creative ways in the design up to the construction of a building. And we had a discussion last week regarding the processes, and in Cyprus you see a bit of skepticism about the timeline moving on and an evolution into BIM. So what would you say it will be the timeline in the next few years that BIM is adopted in Cyprus, and that you would see a more collaborative design in the whole process?
You want me to say the number?
Yes.
10, 15 years. Oh, okay. True, that's true. Just to mention only that nowadays, the architects, as architect, because I'm an architect, I will speak for that. They are afraid to deliver to the authorities or to exchange in a digital form their drawings, because they believe that someone's going to steal their idea. So you have to pass that. It's important. You have to invest in technology and have to use new minds. It's important. But have in mind that in Cyprus, the AC industry, the construction industry, is controlled by contractors. It's very important to understand that. So as they control the market, they demand to drop the prices from each consultant on their studies, and that affects at the end the use of new technologies. Because a young architect will not have the financial power to buy, for example, a 3D printer, or to sell a product, or to buy a drone, for example, or use a laser scan. For example, a good laser scan, 3D laser scan, is approximately 80,000 euros to buy it. So you get the numbers.
Thank you, Simos. I mean, I was expecting a bit more optimistic, to be honest. Sure.
I have a point to make regarding the stealing of ideas. Because that is actually in the startup ecosystem, and especially with first-time founders, so people who found a startup for the first time, is one of the biggest issues as well. They always think, I had the best idea ever. Nobody, if I just say that idea to anybody, they will steal it and rebuild it. So that is something that we, as the founders or also other people in the ecosystem, have to slash quite early to tell founders, you have to forget about this idea is so valuable and so important. It is all about execution. It's all about how you're going to do it. And I think in architecture, that's not so different. What are they going to do with the copy of a design that they have gotten from somewhere? I mean, they don't even have the space or the contract or anything that they would want that they can do this with, or the experience to do it. So just the plan is probably also in architecture not worth so much. It's also there, it's the execution, and it's basically what you have to to make the people aware of.
I'm actually going to give it back again. Because regarding on that, I know that you're now promoting more on the United Nations sustainability goals. And it's quite tough to be executed. And how often do you see startups revolving around those subjects, and how difficult is it for them to innovate in such big issues that our community is facing?
I would say that depends quite much. I mean, those 17 goals, these SDGs, they are quite broad. So there's a lot in there that can be solved. And there's a lot of things that can be touched in little areas where you don't always have to save the whole world at once. And yes, most of those things can be addressed with a similar process as ours. So you can, in any cases, whether you do a non-for-profit or a for-profit business, whether it is impact or is not, you're going to have to look at all those things that are relevant. You have to look at brand. You have to look at what is the problem that I'm solving. Am I solving an impact issue? Am I solving something which doesn't have to do anything with that? You always have to find those things. You have to find the revenue, even if you are doing an impact business. If it's for profit, it can be impact and for profit. There's no per se contradiction between those two. Many people in the past thought it either has to be for profit or it has to be impact. But there's no reason why that both shouldn't be possible. But yes, you have to be diligent, and sometimes it's more difficult to find, for example, sources for investment. It's often very easy to find people who are interested and who are trying to help with network, with information, with consulting, coaching. But the way to find investment or money is at least different. So it doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's different because you're usually looking for sponsorship money or for donations. So it's a bit of a different process, but it's not impossible. If you're looking into, for example, climate tech, which is we're now implementing a climate tech track in our next batch. They also, most of the things apply as they apply to all other startups. But there is specific things that you have to look at. You have to look at what are the regulations in, for example, energy or waste management, or they play a much bigger role than in an e-commerce startup, for example, a different role. And then money sources are different. So, for example, you could get some grants for every electricity which is produced by solar power. So there's a lot of things that you have to that are the same, but there's also some things which are different. And if you have the source of information to make that happen, it's completely possible to do those things as well. And not everybody has to be an Elon Musk to try those things. You have to be bold, and you have to try to do it, and you have to fight for it. But if people find that you are the right one to fight for it, you will have to persuade them and to convince them that you are. But then, yes, they will follow along, and that's the same as in every startup, every company. You have to be the leader to actually make it happen.
Thank you. I think that's quite correct, because the people don't differentiate that it has to be non-profit to do something big to change the world. And that brings us to Monica, because I was reading some of your articles on innovation and Industry 4.0, and I see a big buzzword flying around, smart cities. It applies maybe to some extent to huge cities that have a lot to offer, and the ecosystem is different. Where do you see Cyprus? I can see from your expression it's not going to be a good answer, but I'm going to give you the microphone anyway. Thanks.
So, first of all, just to add to your previous question, I think all enterprises have a responsibility to have a social impact or limit their impact on the environment, either or. So it's not as if they have an option. It's something that has to be done. So even big enterprises are taking steps to reduce carbon footprints, and there are many startups which are social enterprises. And right now in Cyprus, we are now at the process of allowing enterprises to be registered as social enterprises, which opens a lot of room for new grants or new type of investors investing in this type of startups, which is very appealing. So when it comes to smart cities, yes, I think in Cyprus we have still a very long way to go, because having a smart city means having a good ecosystem of initiatives, which ranges from local authorities to autonomous vehicles to electric vehicles, and it requires policy. So if the policy for a smart city is not there yet, or if it's not embedded in our everyday lives, then we cannot have different touches. It's not a pick and mix. It's not a catalog to pick. I want, let's say, smart parking spaces and electric vehicles, but I will leave out the policy for, infrastructure outside. I have worked on a few research projects that had to do with net metering, for example, or BIPVs, which is relevant to this audience from a policy perspective. But I think we're still very, very far behind. Other cities are clearly innovating in this space, and one of them is very near to us, Tel Aviv. Which of course has a very rich automotive research industry, allowing it to make tests. Even let's say autonomous vehicles are expected to be in Tel Aviv streets by next year maximum. So it requires policy, it requires coordination, and an ecosystem that will touch upon every aspect of city life.
Yes, thank you, Monica. I think that goes back to what Simos was saying as well, and Fatima, that you have to have, it's going to take years, but you have to connect a lot of dots along the way. You cannot proceed with, I was reading the other day that they are trying to create a new ministry for digitalization. Am I right on that? And that's a great initiative and a great step from the government side.
Research and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
not digitalization.
Not digitalization, research and innovation. Okay, great. I'm going to move on to Nepos now. Having a different perspective from the academia and also the industry, what would you say is the primary metric when it comes to architectural innovation?
Okay, it's an interesting question, because defining a primary metrics is very difficult one, and it may be misleading and even dangerous at some points, because how do you extract all this information and present it only in one value? I mean, it's good for communication between all stakeholders to know what kind of increase have you gained in what kind of performance, but extracting metrics out of the holistic pictures can be very, very dangerous, and especially it can be applied to the facade field, where you have these much more aspects than probably in some other areas that are more either engineering or design focused. So you have to be really, really careful, because if you claim, for example, that you improve the energy efficiency by closing the windows and living in a black box, would it mean that you would live healthier life, even if you improve 50 times your energy efficiency? So it can be really, really one-sided communicating with this metric, but of course it is important to know each of them, if they are improving or how much they improve, or if sometimes you may compromise in terms of improving 5 performances on top of other maybe 2 or 3, but you should see the whole picture, and that is the what matters actually in the design process. And mapping all this is really important, and having the information about all these metrics during design is actually what matters, not a single value, not a single metric. So depending on design stage, depending on the discussion or the objectives, values, sometimes it's more important to respect cultural values, sometimes you improve corporate identity, sometimes you improve energy efficiency. It's just case by case. Yeah.
Thank you, Natasha. Now I would like to turn to the audience if anyone has a question. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a question for Monica, but others feel free to input as well if you feel like it. Monica, where do you see the Cypriot entrepreneurial ecosystem going and developing based on the factors that Cyprus has to offer? Just to give you a bit of context, earlier in the year, I was in a similar event in Limassol that you were also present, where we had some of the guests saying that, yeah, we also input to the ecosystem. We bring companies from Israel, startups from Israel, and they set up here, but that doesn't really sort of evolve the Cypriot ecosystem, right? Because it doesn't involve young Cypriot minds. It just evolves or gives access to the services industry, right? So we've not done anything that has to do with startups in Cyprus. Where do you see, or how do you see the local ecosystem developing to involve and engage the local sort of wannabe entrepreneurs? Thank you.
Long question.
So, just to also give a context, I was the director of an accelerator before Map Innovation. An accelerator I set up in Limassol on behalf of Deloitte, for which I was working until recently. I have been involved in the creation of the startup ecosystem in Cyprus since 2014. So I have 5 years experience now with the local ecosystem. And I have mentioned many times, to the disappointment of many, that I haven't seen the progress that I was expecting 5 years ago. When people usually say, why do you say that? But really, I haven't seen startups flying and being created on very solid terms in Cyprus. Most of the local startups have some kind of mistaken attitude towards creating and running their own business. Most of them do it on their spare time, which is understandable on the one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't allow them, their lives are not depending on the startup, which means that with the first obstacle, it's very easy to give up. In other countries, there is funding available for people who want to create their businesses from the ground up that allows those people to give up their 9-to-5 jobs in order to focus on the startup. What I have seen, which is a good development very recently, is the new grants announced by the Research Promotion Foundation, which now has been renamed into something else that I don't remember, Innovation and Research something, which will allow a lot of entrepreneurs to submit their grant proposals and get some kind of amount of money to create their startup. At the same time, we're missing venture capital funds and educated investors and educated mentors. It's very easy to say that you can work with startups, but it's not very easy, in my opinion, because it's not realistic. Because if you're a lawyer, let's say, just to take one example, and you're working with big corporates, you cannot easily transfer your experience, your legal experience, to a tech startup. That is the first purpose is to have exponential growth. This is a startup. A startup is a company that is developing a high-tech solution with the purpose of having exponential growth, not a linear growth. It's not an SME, it's not a micro business. That's something completely different. So we are missing key elements. Now, you probably heard me talking about Israeli and Russian startups, I'm not sure, because I have mentioned many times. So my experience, and I still believe this, is that we do need to bring good cases from abroad in order to transfer experience to the local ecosystem. locals do not have experience that can help startups. To a large extent, I'm sure there are some good mentors out there. But if when you're working, next to your desk is next to a Russian startup that I had in Aris, for example, in the accelerator that was developing batteries that were charged by the sun. And that guy was full-time on the startup, and his family was depending on it, and his income was depending on it, and he was working 20 hours a day in order to make a living out of that startup. Then that attitude and culture and way of life is transferred to the ecosystem. It has a ripple effect. So for me, as a strategy, it was a strategy that in my mind worked. At the same time, you need to work with universities and schools. Now I'm working with schoolgirls in order to encourage them to go into STEM, for example. So there's a whole range of activities that need to be done in order to reform this situation that has been created already, which is good, but it's kind of stagnant in my opinion. We need to change some elements that can help local startups to grow. Universities have a big role to play in it. University spin-offs are also very important, academic research. But it requires a number of players, and again, I keep saying the word ecosystem, but this is it. This is the new reality. You need to have an ecosystem of players that will help you, yes, towards this purpose. Don't know if I answer your question.
I just wanted to add to the point that you made regarding Tel Aviv and Russia. I wanted to confirm that, I mean, why not use them? When they are here and they have experience, they have done it, even if they have done it for a year or two and have done things like in marketing, in raising capital and so on and so on. They have some experience. It helps. It is already 2 or 3 or 4 steps ahead of those people who start. They can help you build this core of the system. That's easy. So why not use them? The other point is regarding the taking the risk. So I know both sides. I know the side of being a founder, not taking the risk. I myself, when I founded, I did not jump. I just kept it at the side. Luckily, my co-founder, he jumped. So he took it very serious. He created, the business wasn't successful, but he created another business out of it, where I now also have a small share. So still waiting for that to exit. At the Founder Institute, again, it is actually possible to do it aside from the work, also as a founder, you can do that. But when you graduate, we ask you to leave your job. So we say, if you really take it serious, you can't keep it here. You can try out in these 3 months that our program runs. You can try it out. You get 50 mentors, or 30 to 50 mentors who kick you and to test you, and you have to go to customers. You have to do a lot of things to be aware whether that what you want to do is actually real, whether there's really a business, whether it can work. You actually have to found your company within these 3 months. You're not allowed to graduate to get your diploma if the company isn't set up properly legally. But then you're supposed to actually jump and take the leap. And yes, the grants can help. Grants without this kind of pre-test can be dangerous. So if you're not really sure that your business is meaningful and you don't have enough people to test you, the people who give the grants are not always the right people to test whether you should make a business out of it or not. So it can be too soothing to just have a grant. So having grants is super. It's really helpful. It doesn't take equity usually, so it's a really helpful thing. But it shouldn't be your test for the business. Your test for the business, there should be a lot of insight from mentors. You have to have talked with customers, which is, you might think it's normal that people talk with customers. No, founders usually don't talk with customers. They think, it's my idea, it's great, I have this problem, it must be everyone else's problem. That's not the case. People don't talk with customers, actually test whether it's everyone else's problem as well. So this should happen before you actually go for a grant. Like really verify, is there something or can there be something? And then grants can be combined, hopefully, with VC money and other things, and actually make it happen. And there's also startups which have been created without grants and without VC money. And bootstrapping is a real option. It's not necessary to get other money in. It doesn't have to be. It helps, can help, can also hurt if it's too much too fast, but it's not completely necessary.
So I was thinking when there was a question towards Monica about the smart city, and then I was thinking, let's say Limassol, can we call it, or can we envisage it to become a smart city, or do we need smart municipalities? Because thinking about it, Limassol is divided into municipalities, and then. Because as I told you, let's say I'm an investor in a smart city startup and I want to promote their products in Cyprus because I have a vision that, Limassol should be a smart city. They tell me, well, you should actually go and visit all the, municipality heads or leaders, what they call governors. Anyway, we have huge public sector, around the municipalities. And then try and convince them, to, let's say, put a smart solar powered bench in, that municipality. And I thought, this is ridiculous because, and then actually they would tell me, and you know what, first go to that mayor because that municipality is supposed to be more kind of progressive thinking and they will kind of get you. And I'm like, is this for real? How do we, overcome this, challenge? Because we can't be talking about becoming a smart city or a smart country, whereby we need to go and visit municipalities to educate them what is out there and, how we can smarten up the municipalities. So I'm just curious about that. And then another reflection I had was during the recent trip to Copenhagen and to Berlin, we were talking about it. So the number of green mobility solutions, the e-scooter companies offering, their services, obviously, was impressive. As a minimum, there were 4 or 5 companies, with e-scooters available and so on. To what extent then do you think that, let's say, for me, I would love to have Envoy and Lime and Tier and all these, companies, which for you, being from Berlin, is normal to see them every day, right? But then the fact that we are kind of relatively small city or small market, is it gonna hinder us having these kind of smart solutions? And again, to smarten our city? Maybe, some of the funds from the research and the innovation, should go towards making it more appealing for, globally proven startups to actually position their solutions in Cyprus. Because, actually, I think that, somebody was mentioning that, they have approached Voi to position scooters in Cyprus and they were like, oh, it's too small. It's like the size of the neighborhood in Berlin, the whole possibly market. So it's just some reflections, from your experience. Thank you.
Anyone wants to talk politics on that matter?
Again, it's infrastructure as well. By the way, I didn't answer one part of your question that is related. I strongly believe that in Cyprus, we do have an opportunity because the ecosystem is being built up right now to choose a few sectors that make sense for Cyprus and to focus on. For example, fintech. One other thing that is related to what you're saying is travel technologies. If we convert your argument for scooters, for example, e-scooters. If e-scooters are targeted towards tourists, which are more than 2 million per year, then it's a bigger market than the local market. And since there are efforts to extend the tourist period beyond the summer, perhaps it makes sense to choose what kind of technologies make sense for the travel industry and focus on those. Like what Greece is doing at the moment, which has launched an accelerator focusing on travel tech, for example. The article that Marios read was actually a research paper submitted to a conference. And my argument in that paper was that infrastructure for smart cities is very difficult to be achieved, not only in Cyprus, but everywhere, because the return on investment is very low. It's a social project. So you need to have investors believing in this type of solutions in order to sponsor them. Municipalities, in my opinion, are irrelevant. Not because we don't need them, but you will not start. That's not the starting point of the discussion. You need to bring them to a situation where they cannot refuse. You need to give them the solution and tell them this is it, we're launching tomorrow. So you need to enable our activity in some way that is needed. So I would never depend on the government or the public sector to launch something, because it would never ever happen. And our municipalities are too many in Cyprus, of course. You know very well already, there are 6 municipalities in a city of 250,000 people. And I don't know how many communities, 20, 30, 50 communities, local councils, which share borders. And this is the difficult thing. You cannot have transportation, for example, without involving at least 3 or 4 municipalities along the coastline. I tried in the past and I have failed, that's why I'm telling you. But you should skip them to the point where possible, bring investors that can invest in infrastructure in smart cities, and focus on those aspects that can take advantage of the industries that we are very good on, and one of them is travel.
One thing I think makes sense to look at is look at it with a startup attitude. Like look at it, which of those problems that smart city stuff can solve. I mean, there's endless different solutions that are called smart city, but which of those things actually make sense for whatever, a Paphos or a Larnaca? Maybe the tier scooters are not one of those that actually solve a problem, but maybe there's others which do solve such pain points that they find support in investors or in the municipalities and so on. In the end, it's all about solving problems. And if maybe some of those things are not solving sufficient problems in this size of the cities, then other things might. And you can't force the big airport into a 10,000 people city. It just doesn't make sense for nobody.
Well, if I have to add on that, I would say that there is a point of where you have to validate your idea. You have to validate the market. You have to validate the people, the culture. So you cannot bring, or in most cases, you cannot bring something that's going well abroad, just bring it here, like dragging it. You have to go through the whole process. And I would leave politics at the end of that pipeline. But that's my personal opinion on that. I would go through validation, see what the people need, and then take it, present it to the politics side.
The Californian approach.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, that's the Silicon Valley approach. Just try it, make it real, make it happen.
I saw a question. Yeah. I'm back there.
There you go.
Hi. my question is mainly addressed to Simos again. It's from my personal experience. I worked in London in a large construction company where BIM 3 was standard by the government and by the investors and the clients. So it's something that they demanded and we had to do and we had to deliver. But I came to Cyprus and I worked for another large construction company, Limassol, and they have no clue what's going on. They're barely starting to investigate 3D, and they think that that's the most innovative thing they can do as a construction company. And my big question is why are the investors coming to Cyprus not asking for BIM? Because if a client in London came to our construction company and said, I want you to do my building, but I wanted BIM, and they said, oh, we don't have BIM, he would just leave. So I'm just wondering why this is not happening to the investors coming to Cyprus. Are we approaching the wrong kind of investors, or are we offering them something else in exchange? Or is the government doing something? Do they know? Because what you just said is like they have no clue what's going on. But why isn't this being demanded by the clients and the investors coming to Cyprus? We're building like 10 skyscrapers in Limassol, and I highly doubt that any of them has used BIM, or they probably just use Revit as a basic model and without using the actual BIM properties. So I was just wondering if you know what's going on and if there's an initiative by yourself, for example, to go and approach these people and educate them on this matter. And that's it.
I'm pretty sure the answer will be on politics again.
Definitely.
So yeah, I know the answer.
It's like a good therapy session.
The answer is the price. Okay. So as a company, we have participated in lots of tender documents and tender processing for requested BIM from the Cypriot contractors. Okay, so we have been also in the situation that contractors came on the second day and asked us for BIM, and then we put the numbers down and gave our price. So what's the problem here? If a contractor or a design office will take the job from a local investing fund that will bring the UK office in order to design the first initial model, and then you will take it to proceed on the shop drawings, etc., etc. All those decisions were made by politics. They didn't take it because they are experienced offices. They are locally, but if you see globally, they are not. Okay? I know young people that can build skyscrapers, but they don't have the power to do it. Christos is one of those. So the problem is that when the discussion of the project starts, the contractors start calculating their fees and their expenses based on the traditional way of doing things.
Yes.
Okay, so if they calculate that, for example, we're gonna find, let's say, casino. Okay, the casino will cost half a billion euros to be built. So they didn't have any idea about BIM. Then they win the contract, and the owner or the consultant of the owner demands by default on the contract that it has to be executed by BIM. Here's the problem. The main designer of the project is not asking from the contractor to do the BIM for his own. He don't have interest. For example, let's say one big office, Atkins. Mm-hmm. Atkins have the power to do it in BIM. They deliver the project and they say on the specifications that architects, local architects and local contractors use that process in order to achieve benefits and cost reduction on the construction period. Okay, so it's not on him, it's on the contractor. So the local contractor is coming to us. Okay, guys, the owner asked for BIM. How much? Think about that. 27 months time period from the casino as a project, calculating all the people that has to work to build and design the digital twin from scratch because the contractors and the local architects didn't do a good job. Okay. And deliver at the end of the day in 2 years, more than 2 years, the project, put the minimum fees on each person that will work. Let's say that we will need 15 people working every day. You see the amount, it's almost 1 million. So if you're gonna come to the contractor and tell him, I have a demand for 1 million in order to implement BIM, he will reject. And he will say, I will do it the traditional way. Or he will find a pirate BIM expert. A guy that knows Revit or knows something else as a program, and he will assign the job to do it with less money. That's the problem in Cyprus. The contractors don't understand that by using BIM on a project, they can reduce the cost, the impact on the invest.
They don't understand the benefit. They just see short term, not long term.
Yeah, that's the price is the main problem.
Now, we're running a bit late, I know, but I have to take this because we have Mr. Neocleos with us from the government, so we have to get something out of this, and it has to be on the microphone.
Marius, I don't want to answer the political question because I can answer it. I just want to say 2-3 buzzwords because Monica is smiling there. The first is change. Change is very scary for some people. You mentioned the lawyers. Imagine lawyers, they charge for a contract 100,000 euros now, and you have startups in England now developing smart contracts on blockchain, which is for free. Think about it. The next buzzword is vision, political vision, and think about how many of those we have in Cyprus. And you mentioned smart cities. Smart cities start with smart leaders. So it's a good thing to know. But my question is technical. I'll go to the technical part. Because you mentioned 10 to 15 years, and this is scary. And you mentioned the cost. But I want to take another view, and I want to see that you are in the business, maybe you know it better. And the fact is that there's a lot of theory behind, because still the technology, it's very machine power demanding. BIM and a lot of these concepts, you mentioned artificial intelligence, just to mention a few, to run a model on AI for a whole city, or a cloud point, or a point cloud for a whole city, you still need a lot of investment in hardware. And my question is, in a few years' time, when this will not be needed, maybe this will expedite what you said. And this was my question. Because running a platform, a web platform with a web service for this very big data and large amount of data, you need to calculate and do all these things on the internet. I think it's prohibitive now. And this is my question to you. You currently face it in your business because you showed a model of a church. Obviously, to run this model, you needed a powerful machine. So this is a prohibitive for me, I think, personally. So I wanted to see your opinion as well. And maybe we skip the political part. Thank you.
That's a shame, but really nice question. Thank you very much.
I think the best answer here is that if you try once, then you have to try it second, and third, and fourth time. So machine is good. Technology and the innovation behind the technology is very good to follow it and understand where it's going. So, for example, if I'm going to use the HoloLens and I know that I will need a graphic card, on that power, maybe if I use 2 graphic cards combined in less money, less power, maybe I can do the job. We have to follow. And in our case, it's something that we know. We know that local market is not knowing BIM, but we started from now to the next step, artificial intelligent BIM. It's the future when computers will do everything. Now you can come to our office and see we have built an algorithm that by putting the parameters from the urban planning authorities about on the land surveyors department about the zone, the square areas, and by just clicking, you have a building mass already based on those numbers, just in seconds. Previously, architects usually they took the amounts, they make calculations, they think, okay, if I will split square meters here, how much will be there, and think the loss on the time. So we create a code. The code took us 1 week, 2 weeks, let's say. No power, you don't need a power. You just use the machine learning process. It's a great process, and it's good to startup companies to invest in that.
By the way, with the current internet possibilities, it's very difficult to have a complete 100% working smart city or digital twins. 5G is what is going to be the enabler behind real-time monitoring and reaching the full possibilities of what can be done with digital twins and big data analysis and so on and so forth. I know many people are very concerned with this, but the latency in 4G does not allow for a full spectrum of possibilities. So this is a link that is still missing everywhere, not only in sectors.